Good evening. Dr. Eliza von Ueden-Forgy, Executive Director of Lemkin Institute for Genocide, will sit down with the First Analytical tonight. Dr. Forgy, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here.
Dr. Forgy, Lemkin Institute, which you are the head of, sounded the alarm before the forced deportation of more than 100,000 ethnic Armenians from NK, but prevention failed, obviously, and now we have to face the fact of forced deportation itself. What should follow?
Well, I think that the international community needs to adjudicate this situation using international law, and particularly the right of peoples to self-determination. This is something that the Artsakhi Armenians have been asking for decades, right? Over a century, really. And which has never really received the attention that it deserves. And now it has ended in what the Lemkin Institute calls a genocide that we believe is ongoing. And we don't think it's over. We have an opportunity, this is what we say, right? We have an opportunity with Artsakh because so many of the Artsakhi people are still alive. We have an opportunity to reverse aspects of the genocide and restore this ancient community to its homeland. And I think the international community should do that.
Dr. Forgy, what happened in NK is forced deportation, that is direct genocide and a crime against humanity. Am I accurate in my definitions?
Yes, yes. Well, forced deportation is not listed specifically within the Genocide Convention.
But that's exactly what happened in the Ottoman Empire during the Armenian genocide, which basically all superpowers have recognized.
Yes, now. Absolutely. The Armenian genocide has been recognized by many superpowers, by many states, and by almost all scholars, right? So all serious genocide scholars have recognized the Armenian genocide, and deportation was an important part of that genocide. It was also an important part of the Holocaust and is an important part of most genocidal processes. And so it's very important that the Artsakh the events in Artsakh be put in a larger framework, right, in order to see the genocidal dimensions of it. So forced deportation is mentioned as a crime against humanity specifically and a war crime. In the Genocide Convention, it falls under certain provisions or certain acts that are recognized as acts of genocide. And one of them is creating the conditions of life meant to destroy a group in whole or in part, right? So the argument there is that Artsakh civilization, which is a very distinct form of Armenian civilization, cannot continue without the community, right, being in its land and part of a workable community, right? And that can only happen with the right of return, right? The restoration of Artsakhi people to their land.
So to be clear, what happened was starvation basically and a blockade of 10 months, then forced deportation. So is this genocide or is this not genocide?
It is absolutely 100% genocide, and I think it's very, very difficult to argue otherwise. We will often hear the term, I'll make a caveat, because one often hears the term ethnic cleansing used instead of genocide.
By the way, as you mentioned, the political community, the international political community, even the politics and politicians in Armenia call this ethnic cleansing. But is this not a political euphemism for forced deportation, which is direct and a genocide?
Yes, yes, the same term was used in the Bosnian genocide. Why? Because it's the term that the Serbs used for what they were doing. And somehow the international press and then the United Nations itself co-opted this term, which is a term of art used by perpetrators of genocide to describe what they were doing. And now somehow this term has become, yes, used exactly as a euphemism, as if it is a standalone crime, which it is not. It is not defined as a crime. Ethnic cleansing does not have its own sort of legal definition.
Whereas genocide, for genocide, we have Genocide Convention.
Precisely. Precisely. We have the Genocide Convention, and genocide is not used as a term often. It's used very narrowly because the convention requires states. It puts the responsibility on states universally to stop or prevent and then punish genocide. And so they have to get involved if it's a genocide. There's a moral responsibility to get involved if there's a genocide, which doesn't exist with ethnic cleansing because ethnic cleansing is not a law.
After the forced deportation of more than 100,000 Armenians from NK, the Armenian genocide is no longer just a historical fact. It is a descriptor of the present-day existential threat posed by regional powers, an indicator of what might come in the future if the international community does not intervene. Do you believe that the international community is aware that Armenia might be, and Armenians might be on the verge of yet another genocide?
I think there's a willful blindness in the international community not to see this. I think they're aware of all of the red flags and they're not putting them together correctly because it's inconvenient. It's a lot of, it will take hard work, right, to undo the situation that now exists. But I agree with you that Armenia is facing an existential crisis, that the Aliyev regime in Azerbaijan is unlikely to stop with Artsakh, as Aliyev himself has said, and that the international community is in fact ignoring the very clear genocidal speech against Armenians coming from Azerbaijan.
Rwanda genocide started with the mass propaganda and demonization of the people that were about to be massacred. Now the whole staff of the 1000 Hills radio station that were responsible for laying the basis of Rwanda genocide are in ICJ prisons. Now, as you mentioned yourself, Azerbaijani mass media is doing the same now, spreading Armenophobia. Is there a mechanism to bring those responsible before ICJ or to stop this?
Yes, there are legal mechanisms to stop this. The ICJ, the Armenian government, right, could bring a case to the ICJ, or a third-party government could bring a case to the ICJ on Armenia's behalf. Personally, I think that would be an ideal situation because it wouldn't put Armenia in such a difficult diplomatic situation as bringing another case against Azerbaijan. These cases have become part, right, of Azerbaijan's demands against Armenia in the ongoing peace process and border delimitation process. So to politicize it a little less, I think it would be useful if a third-party state did so. The ICC, right? Armenia is now a party to the ICC. The ICC could bring a case against members of the Aliyev regime. Cases could be brought under universal jurisdiction, right? I know there's work ongoing towards that end. And so there are many legal mechanisms that could be used for genocide prevention now against the Aliyev regime for things it has already done.
Dr. Forgi, we consider the 44-day war and the September aggression against Armenia as genocidal. Do you yourself, as a professional, see a direct link between the Armenian genocide a century ago in the Ottoman Empire and the atrocities that Azerbaijan has committed recently against ethnic Armenians?
Yes, I do. And I think that's an excellent question, and it's something that we have to make very clear internationally as much as possible, that because Turkey has never been held accountable for the Armenian genocide, right, in World War I, and because Turkey, the ideology that drove that genocide has never been uprooted from Turkish institutions or Turkish statecraft.
Even now, when Turkish researchers or intellectuals recognize it, they are persecuted for doing so.
Absolutely, right. And there's a law against recognition in Turkey. And Turkey is pursuing pan-Turkic foreign policy, do you know? It is supporting Azerbaijan and Azerbaijan's genocidal assault on Armenia. Azerbaijan is very much acting as a proxy for Turkish interests in the region. And, you know, so in that way, the same ideology that drove the genocide of 1915 to 1923 is driving genocidal acts against Armenia now. And certainly in 2020, you only had to look at the horrible atrocities that Azeri soldiers committed against Armenian civilians who fell into their hands, and then put on social media and celebrated in order to see the echoes of the genocide of 1915 to 1923. Also in the language, so for example, beheadings were common during the 2020 genocide, and this harkens back to the symbolic violence used by Ottoman Turks during the 1915 genocide.
As well as the tortures by Azeri soldiers of Armenian military servicewomen.
Absolutely, torture and humiliation, right? Forcing Armenian soldiers to say Artsakh is Azerbaijan, right? Or killing Armenian soldiers when they're wrapped in the Artsakh or the Armenian flag. That kind of highly symbolic violence, or in the 2022 aggressive war against Armenia, the sexualized violence that was committed against female soldiers, right? Is just clearly suggestive of genocidal ideology and genocidal intent. And we know that as genocide scholars. Furthermore, the language, calling Armenians dogs, hyenas, right? Jackals, terrorists, right? This sort of language, it's dehumanizing language, and it's the language of extermination.
What is your message to the international community in the context of what we have been discussing?
Yeah. The international community needs to get serious about protecting Armenian lives. It has failed over and over again throughout history, particularly the Western world, to protect this ancient civilization of Armenians. It must protect Armenians here in the South Caucasus. It must return Armenians to Artsakh, or at least begin the process of adjudicating self-determination claims amongst Artsakh Armenians. And it must protect Armenians in the diaspora, a diaspora that was formed both through trade but also through mass atrocity and genocide. So, for example, in East Jerusalem, Armenians must be protected, and in the further afield diaspora, Armenians need to be protected from the terrorist Grey Wolves organization. There's a coordinated assault against Armenian sovereignty, sovereignty of individual bodies, but also collective sovereignty around the world that is bankrolled by Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Israel. And the world needs to put a stop to it, because we are no longer in the days where we can afford to sacrifice ancient civilizations the way that we have for the last 500 years. We're facing the extinction of the human species with climate change, and we need the wisdom and and the inspiration that ancient civilizations can bring to the world in order to survive. And the Armenians are one of the oldest continuous ancient civilizations in the world, and they must be protected.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
one more
so
time for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor.
Dr. Eliza von Heuden-Forgy, the Executive Director of Lemkin Institute, sat down with the First Analytical tonight.